Imagine you are at the peak of your life. You are 39 years old. You have 4 kids. You have a beautiful family. You build a career that millions of people only dream about. You ran faster than almost any human being who ever played professional football. You broke records that had stood for decades. You made entire stadiums hold their breath every single time you touched the ball. And then one morning, you try to pick something up, and your hand doesn't work the way it used to. You don't think much of it at first. You played 10 years in the NFL. Your body has been through things most people cannot imagine. Hits, surgeries, pain that never fully goes away. You tell yourself it's just wear and tear. It's football. This is just part of the price you paid for the life you lived. But the weakness doesn't go away. It gets worse. And then the doctors sit you down, and they say 3 letters that will permanently divide your life into a before and an after. ALS. This is the story of Chris Johnson, one of the most electrifying football players who ever lived. A man who ran so fast that people gave him a nickname that sounded more like a superhero than a running back. CJ2K. A man who set records that still stand today. A man who, at 39 years old, sat down in front of a camera with his wife by his side and told the world the truth about what is happening to his body. And what he said, and how he said it, will stay with you for a long time. Let's go back to where this story really starts. Because to understand what Chris Johnson losing his body means, you first have to understand what his body was capable of. February 2008. The NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. This is the event where college players who want to be drafted into the NFL go through a series of tests in front of coaches, scouts, and executives from every team in the league. Every inch of you gets measured. Every drop of your athleticism gets evaluated. It is one of the most pressure-filled days in any young football player's life. Chris Johnson stepped onto that track and ran the 40-yard dash. He ran in 4.24 seconds. Let that land for a second. 4.24 seconds. That was, at that time, the fastest 40-yard dash ever recorded at the NFL Combine. It was not just fast. It was a different category of fast. It was the kind of speed that made people in the building look at each other and ask, "Did we just see what we think we saw?" The Tennessee Titans saw it. They drafted him in the first round. 24th pick overall. A kid out of East Carolina with a smile that could light up a room and legs that could blur on camera. He was 21 years old when he arrived in Nashville. He had never had real money before. He was still figuring out who he was as a person, as a man, as a professional. And he walked into a city that didn't know yet what was about to fall in love with. It didn't take long. In his very first NFL season, Chris Johnson rushed for 1,228 yards and scored 9 touchdowns. As a rookie, that would be a career year for most running backs. For Chris Johnson, it was just the beginning. Then came 2009. And 2009 was something else entirely. There are seasons in professional sports that become legendary. Seasons so dominant, so jaw-dropping, that they get talked about for generations. Michael Jordan's scoring titles. Wayne Gretzky's goal seasons. Barry Bonds in 2001. These are performances that exist in a category by themselves. Chris Johnson's 2009 season belongs in that conversation. He rushed for 2,006 yards that year. 2,006 yards. On the ground. Running the ball. In a single NFL season. That is a number so big that it had only been reached 5 times before in the entire history of professional football. He joined a list that includes some of the most revered names the sport has ever produced. But rushing yards alone don't capture the full picture. Because Chris Johnson also caught passes out of the backfield. He was a weapon in every single way a running back can be a weapon. And when you add up everything he did that season, rushing yards, receiving yards, return yards, he set the NFL single-season all-purpose yards record, 2,509 yards. In a single year. That record still stands today. He was named the AP Offensive Player of the Year. He was a Pro Bowl selection. He was a first-team All-Pro. And he did all of it on a Titans team that finished 8-8. An average team. A team that nobody was picking to do anything special that year. And yet every Sunday, when Chris Johnson touched the ball, something remarkable happened. He became CJ2K. And Nashville, the whole state of Tennessee, adopted him as one of their own. He would go on to play 10 seasons in the NFL. 6 with the Titans, and then stints with the New York Jets and the Arizona Cardinals. By the time he retired in 2017, he had rushed for 9,651 yards, caught 307 passes for 2,255 receiving yards, and scored 64 total touchdowns. He was inducted into the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame in 2024. He had given everything he had to the game. And then he walked into the rest of his life. He started a podcast called Smash and Dash with his old teammate and friend Lendale White. He stayed connected to the Titans organization. He expressed interest in a career in scouting, in giving back to the sport that had given him so much. He was present at games, at events, visible and warm and full of life. He had 4 children, a loving wife named Brittany, a future that looked bright and full of possibility. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, something changed. It started quietly, the way these things often do. A little weakness in his right hand. His grip didn't feel quite right. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed emergency. Just a subtle wrongness that was easy to push aside. He was a former NFL player. His body had been through 10 years of professional football. Of course things were going to feel different. Of course there would be lingering effects from a career spent taking hits and pushing his physical limits. He and his wife Brittany talked about it and decided it was probably just the residue of football. Just the game reminding him it had taken something from him. But the weakness didn't stop. It spread. And when the doctors finally had all the information they needed, when the tests came back and the specialist had reviewed everything, they delivered the diagnosis. ALS. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. You might know it as Lou Gehrig's disease, named after the legendary baseball player who announced his own diagnosis to the world in 1939 in one of the most famous speeches in American sports history. ALS is a progressive neurological disease. That word progressive sounds almost gentle, like progress is something good. But in the context of ALS, progressive means the disease keeps moving. It doesn't stop. It attacks the nerve cells in your brain and your spinal cord, the cells that are responsible for controlling all voluntary movement. Every movement, every muscle. Over time, ALS takes away your ability to move your arms and legs. It takes away your ability to speak, your ability to swallow, and eventually, your ability to breathe. There is no cure. And there is no history of ALS in Chris Johnson's family. His doctors believe his case is what is called sporadic ALS, which sounds unusual, but is actually the most common form of the disease. It means it didn't come from genetics. It just happened. No warning. No reason. No explanation that fully satisfies the question that every ALS patient and every family member of an ALS patient eventually asks. Why? Chris Johnson sat down with Michael Strahan on Good Morning America. The two men have something in common. Strahan himself was an NFL legend, a Hall of Fame defensive end who played his entire career with the New York Giants. He knows what it means to give your body to the game. He knows the brotherhood of professional football. And he sat across from Chris Johnson and listened. Johnson had his wife Brittany beside him. And he spoke. Or rather, he communicated with the help of a speech-generating device. Because the disease had already progressed to the point where his voice was no longer fully his own. And what he said with that device, what he chose to communicate to the world on one of the most watched morning shows in America, said everything about the kind of man Chris Johnson is. Chris Johnson sat down with Michael Strahan on Good Morning America. The two men have something in common. Strahan himself was an NFL legend, a Hall of Fame defensive end who played his entire career with the New York Giants. He knows what it means to give your body to the game. He knows the brotherhood of professional football. And he sat across from Chris Johnson and listened. Johnson had his wife Brittany beside him. And he spoke. Or rather, he communicated with the help of a speech-generating device. Because the disease had already progressed to the point where his voice was no longer fully his own. And what he said with that device, what he chose to communicate to the world on one of the most watched morning shows in America, said everything about the kind of man Chris Johnson is. He said, "First, I want people to know that I'm still me." Think about that. In a moment that would have broken most people. In a moment where he had every right to be angry, every right to be consumed by grief, every right to be anything other than composed. He led with that. I'm still me. ALS has changed what my body can do. But it doesn't change who I am. He talked about how fast the disease has moved. He said that just over a year ago, he was picking up his 7-year-old daughter so she could make a wish over her birthday cake. Just a normal, beautiful moment. A father lifting his child. Something so ordinary that most parents do it without thinking. Today, he said, he couldn't do that. In a year, 1 year, the disease had moved that fast. And still, he sat in front of that camera. He chose to share his story publicly. Not because he had to, not because anyone forced him, but because he made a decision that if his story could help even one person get diagnosed sooner, if it could inspire even a little more research funding, if it could give even one other family some sense that they are not alone in this, then it was worth it. That is not a small thing. That is not an easy thing. That is a man who, in one of the hardest chapters of his life, chose to use whatever platform he had left to try to make things better for someone else. The Titans organization responded immediately. Amy Adams Strunk, the controlling owner of the team, released a statement that spoke not just to what Johnson meant to the franchise, but to what he means as a human being. She said that some people leave a mark on an organization that you just cannot put into words. And that Chris Johnson is one of those people. She said the team would support him every step of the way. Fans across the NFL, across sports in general, responded with an outpouring of love that tells you exactly how much this man meant to people who watched him play. Because Chris Johnson was not just a statistic. He was not just a record on a page or a highlight on a reel. He was joy. Every time he took a handoff and hit that first gap, every time he found open space and those legs started moving at a speed that felt illegal, there was something in it that made you feel alive just watching. There was something pure about it. Something that reminded you why you loved sports in the first place. That feeling of watching a human being do something they were uniquely built to do, at a level that most people cannot even conceptualize. That was Chris Johnson. And now, at 39 years old, with 4 children who need their father and a wife who stands beside him with a strength that is its own kind of remarkable, he is facing something that no speed, no record, no championship can protect you from. ALS does not care who you are. It does not care what you've accomplished. It does not check your trophy case before it decides to take root. It arrived in the body of one of the fastest human beings who ever lived, and began doing what it always does. Quietly, relentlessly, taking things away. But here is what ALS cannot take. It cannot take the memory of that 2009 season. It cannot erase 2,509 all-purpose yards, or the record that still stands. It cannot undo the 6 straight 1,000-yard seasons, the Pro Bowls, the All-Pro selections, the millions of moments where a stadium full of people held their breath and watched something they knew they might never see again. It cannot change the fact that a city embraced him, that Tennessee called him family, that a whole generation of kids grew up watching CJ2K and believing that speed could be beautiful. And it cannot change who he is inside. He said so himself. I'm still me. There is a moment that keeps coming back when you think about this story. That birthday cake. His 7-year-old daughter, standing at a table, waiting for the moment she gets to close her eyes and make a wish. And her father who once ran faster than almost any man alive, picking her up so she could lean in close to those candles. A year later, he can no longer do that. And yet he sat down in front of a camera and told the world, not to ask for sympathy, but to offer something, to try to turn his pain into purpose, to try to make sure that other families who are walking the road he is now walking feel less alone. That is not just an athlete. That is a person of extraordinary character. ALS research has come a long way since Lou Gehrig stood at a microphone in Yankee Stadium and told a crowd of people that he considered himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. But it has not come far enough. There is still no cure. There are treatments that can slow the progression for some patients, but nothing that stops it. Nothing that reverses it. Every story like Chris Johnson's, every public diagnosis, every person who chooses to speak rather than stay silent, adds something to the larger conversation, raises awareness, potentially directs resources toward research, potentially inspires the next generation of scientists who might be the ones who finally crack the code. If Chris Johnson's story moves even one person to donate to ALS research, he will have scored something far more important than any touchdown he ever ran in. There is a question that hangs over everything when someone like Chris Johnson receives a diagnosis like this. What do you do at the time? And watching his interview, watching the way he carried himself, watching the way his wife sat beside him with steady eyes and held his hand, you get a sense that Chris Johnson already knows the answer to that question. You keep being you. You stay present for your family. You find the ways you can still contribute, still connect, still mean something to the people around you. You use your platform, even a diminished one, even one that now requires a device to generate the words, to say the things that matter. You remind people that the measure of a person is not what their body can do. It is who they are when everything they thought defined them starts to fall away. CJ2K ran faster than almost anyone ever has in an NFL uniform. But what Chris Johnson is doing right now, what he is choosing to do in the face of something that would bring most people to their knees, might be the most remarkable thing he has ever done. He stepped in front of a camera. He told the truth. He said, I'm still me. And somehow, in a story that is heartbreaking and unfair and full of questions that don't have easy answers. That feels like the most important thing he has ever said.